Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hello, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. Imagine going to the beach to take a picture of the ocean. What is the color of the water? If you had the same camera and you were at the same beach 3.7 billion years ago, the color of the water would be a shade of purple. The shade of purple is likely to have been caused by sulfuric bacteria that ruled the world at that point in time. And changes always happened. However, that point in time, life began to change quite dramatically. Just as the continents were beginning to form, an organism called stromatolites started to take over. Now, if you go to Shark Bay in Australia, you can see these ugly little things. But what they did was dramatic in the sense that they started to harness their energy from the sun using photosynthesis. The oceans were not only purple, but the air was toxic. It was loaded with nitrogen and carbon dioxide, water vapor, and 1% of oxygen. So these guys, the stromatolites, they would take in the carbon dioxide and they'd convert it to oxygen. And then the stromatolites continued to expand and prosper. They put out tons of oxygen into the atmosphere. Currently, oxygen makes up about 21% of the Earth's atmosphere by volume. And it's this vast amount of oxygen that allows the growth of life on Earth. Even so, this oxygenation process, it's tediously slow. It took eons for any substantial change to occur. And when it comes to our business, and especially sales, we need to oxygenate, not at this slow pace. We can't wait forever. So how do we breathe oxygen into our sales process? Well, there are 3 ways, as you would expect, and they are: 1, getting enthusiastic about a tiny portion instead of everything. The 3 questions formula, which you probably heard of before. And finally, listening for objections. Let's start out with the first one, which is getting enthusiastic about a tiny portion instead of everything. If you've ever watched David Attenborough on many documentaries, what he tends to do is walk through a forest, or he'll walk through an ocean, or he'll go through this vast expanse of everything. And then he doesn't explain everything. He drops to his knees when he could drop to his knees, and he'd pick up a tiny little flower. And then he shows you that flower, and then he starts to explain about that flower. And suddenly, one little flower in one obscure forest somewhere is now interesting to you. And this method, which is getting enthusiastic about a tiny portion, is what you have to do as well, is what I have to do as well, is what every restaurant has to do as well. Because you know this. When you go into a restaurant and you pick up the menu, you have this vast choice, or rather these choices to make. And you ask the waiter, what do you recommend? And then they give you this inane answer. They say, everything. And you knew that, didn't you? You know that the restaurant, theoretically at least, is there to serve you everything that is good and wonderful and tasty. But you wanted to know about one thing, one tiny little thing. But no, they want to tell you everything. And that's not what David Attenborough would do. He would show you one tiny little thing. So let's say you're a reseller. Say you have software, and the software can do this and that and everything. Well, when you go in front of someone and you're explaining that software, you start to explain everything. And when you explain everything, not a lot gets through because you can't be enthusiastic about everything on the menu, which is why the waiter says everything. They can't be enthusiastic about everything. And yet, if they got interested in one little thing, they would get enthusiastic about it. And you've heard me say this before. Sales is a transfer of enthusiasm from one person to another. This also solves the problem of having many salespeople selling your products. Let's say that you have a company and you have 10 salespeople. Well, they all have different motivations. One is motivated by money, the other is motivated by family. They have different motivations. Yet, when they're going out to sell something, what we give them is the toolkit, and we say, go out and sell this product. And obviously, they enjoy selling the product, but they don't enjoy selling everything. And the key factor is always, what is the one thing that excites you the most about this product? And that salesperson will tell you what excites them the most about that product. And that's the thing that will bring out the most enthusiasm. They'll have the reasons why the client should buy. And that's how you oxygenate that sales process. You put in all that oxygen at one go, and it goes from 1% to 21%, just like that. Because now they're just focused on that one little thing which they're excited about. And it's the same thing when you're on your sales page, for instance. You want to talk about everything, as you should. But I can't take everything, and you can't explain everything. So it's always that one little thing that you're the most excited about. That's the point that you have to get across. And that transfers enthusiasm. That becomes that David Attenborough moment. And with that, we finish the first point of how to put all of that oxygen into your sales process. The second point that we're going to cover is the 3 questions formula. What is a formula that is so effective that it gets the other person, the person that you're selling to, totally engaged and wants to hear more from you? When I was writing The Brain Audit, which is the book that you get on psychotactics, when I was writing it almost 22 years ago, I ran into a salesperson that was selling monitored burglar alarms. And we'd already bought a burglar alarm and put it up somewhere. Hence, I was not in the market for burglar alarms. But instead of trying to sell me the burglar alarms, he started to ask me questions. He says, what happens when the alarm goes off? And of course, I answered. And then he asked me, what happens next? Do the neighbors come to help? And of course, neighbors don't necessarily come to help, especially if you live in the city, and if you live in the country, no one can hear it anyway. And then he asked me more questions. But what he was doing was not trying to sell anything. He had gotten one point across, but then he started asking questions. One question, the second question, the third question. And to ask these questions, and usually the questions are related to just one point, you have to listen. And when you're listening, you can't speak at the same time. Because this is what a lot of people do. Every time you tell them a story, they start to talk about their story, and they're not listening to you. They're thinking of their own story. And when you ask questions, and I do this quite a lot with almost anybody I meet, they will say something, and I will ask them one question, then I will ask them the second one, then I will ask them the third one. And if you meet me in person, you'll probably see that this is what is quite obvious once you know it. But what it does is it stops you from talking. And when the other person is talking, they are getting more interested in whatever they are saying and subconsciously getting more interested in you. We always have people that seem to want to talk and talk and talk and talk. And when you're in sales or trying to sell something, you're kind of slightly desperate to sell whatever it is you're selling, whether it's a workshop or some software or whatever it is that you're selling. You want to get that point across. And when you start asking questions, the whole mood changes, the whole tempo changes. You start listening. And try today, just stop talking so much and start asking questions. Because they will say something and you ask them a question, and then they will talk for a while and you ask a second question related to that same thing, and then ask a third question and see how it goes. And you will find that people are more interested in you because you're more interested in them. Funny that. But in doing so, they also tell you exactly how they are thinking, the problems that they are facing. And it's at this point that they will come up with objections as well. In this podcast, we've gone through two parts. The first is just talk about one thing that you're really excited about. And everybody doesn't have to talk about the same thing. If you've got 10 salespeople can talk about 10 separate things individually. The second thing that we talked about was asking the 3 questions, because that shows that you're interested in the other person and not just blah, 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 hearing your own voice all the time. The third thing is you actually paying attention to the fact that they are objecting. So let's go into the third part. At some point in time, you will find that the client is objecting. Now, they're not throwing you out of the room, they're objecting. When you're selling something on a sales page, you can't wait for that objection. You have to preempt that objection and you have to put it on the sales page and then write the answers to that, whatever those objections are. However, in a real sales situation, you want to wait for the objections. And that tells you that the other person is not throwing you out of the room, that they're listening to you. And yet they have already a system in place. They have some other competitor there. They're telling you that they actually like your stuff in some sort of weird way. And under different conditions, maybe they would have bought your stuff. But they're objecting. When people object, what they're really saying is, I would like to do this, but there is this other thing in the way. And in a strange way, they're telling you that you're number 2, that someone else, number 1, is already in place. And if they goof up, when they goof up, which they will goof up, at that point in time, you have free reign, you have free entry into the place, if you keep in touch. So they're very clearly specifying through their objections that you have to overcome those objections. And if you do so, then there will be a point in time when they will say yes. It might not be now. It might be a slow oxygenation process, but it will happen. And I found this when I go out to do my photography. Now, with marketing, we charge quite a lot of money when someone comes to a consulting session or to a workshop or to whatever. But with photography, I take all these really stunning black and white pictures and I don't charge anything. And I don't get in their way. I'm like a fly on the wall, for want of a better term. Even so, there are objections. Even so, there are people that go, oh, but what if this happens? Or what if that happens? But notice they're not saying, no, don't show up to take any photographs. Because if they wanted to say no, they would have said no. Instead, they bring up the objections. And then it's kind of a waiting game. You calm down those objections, and then you keep showing up on a regular basis. And sometimes it takes a long time, a few months, a year even. But eventually, you get your foot in the door, and then they love it. And then they say, come back anytime. So sales is really this transfer of enthusiasm, and you show enthusiasm in 3 ways, which is what we're doing right now. We're summarizing what we've covered today. The first way is not to talk about everything, but just to talk about that one little thing that you're excited about. Yes, it's possible that they're not excited about it, but when David Attenborough goes to reach for a flower, you don't know anything about it. You're not objecting, hey, you didn't show me the rest of the forest. No, you get excited because the other person is excited. And so start out with that, which is find something in the software, find something in the program that you have, find something that already excites you and talk about it. When I teach InDesign, I'm interested in the library. That's such a cool tool. You might not know anything about the library, but I will talk about it and I will be excited about it. And that's what gets your attention rather than InDesign, which has all these tools and buttons and all of that stuff. You're not interested in that. You just want to know, why is this library so cool? What is he talking about? But at some point in time, the client will say something, and that's when you stop talking. And that's when you start asking questions. 1, 2, 3. Count your questions, please. Count them. 1, 2, 3. And you will notice that there's a change in the atmosphere of the room. They are now paying attention to you because you're listening to them and not trying to sell them something. And finally, they will come up with an objection because a customer is not ready to buy when you're ready to sell. That would be so lovely, but it doesn't happen. Most of the times they have objections, and you just have to bide your time and make sure that you're in number 2 position and following up on a regular basis. But the fact that there are objections means that they're interested. Otherwise, they would have just thrown you out of the room. So pay attention to the objections and don't treat them like they're a problem, but in fact, they're the invitation for a party that's down the line, somewhere down the line, a week from now, 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, whenever. And yes, that brings us to the end of this podcast. What's the one thing that you can do today? The one thing that all of us can do today is ask 3 questions in almost every conversation. Whether you're speaking to your niece who's 5 years old, or to a grandparent who's 75 years old, or to your client, or to anybody, we talk so much and we don't ask questions. So 1, 2, 3, ask 3 questions. If you try and do that in your normal day-to-day banter with people, you will find that you're more likable. And that gives you a lot of leeway in life when people like you. And it's just by asking questions. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. In August of this year, we're going to be selling the article writing course. And this is the live article writing course, which means that I am there helping you along for 3 whole months. And yes, it's really hard. It's called the toughest writing course in the world. And for good reason. You've got to do all your work. You've got to run your business. And then on top of that, you have to write articles. I'm not saying it's easy for you or for me, which is why the course is held so infrequently. The last time we had it was in 2020. And the next time, who knows, maybe 2026, we'll see. But the point is that despite the world that we live in, which is AI, where you can just churn stuff out, even the search engines are getting smarter. Everything is getting smarter because they know that anyone can do anything. And so storytelling and the style in which you write, all of that structure, all of that is going to matter more so in today's world, which is AI driven, than it ever did before. But at a very primal level, the three things we want to do is we want to speak, we want to draw, and we want to write. This is what all kids want to do. And when you are able to write really well, you're able to just put things together. And at first, it is on paper. You have to kind of outline and figure out the structure and put it together and find stories and stuff. And then after a while, and it's not immediate, but after a while, it all happens in your brain, just like how you speak a language right now. You don't necessarily have to keep thinking, what am I going to say next? It's so wonderful when you can create all of this information, this entire article, bits and pieces all floating around, and then like some magical Hollywood movie, it all comes together in your brain. And that's a great moment. That's exciting when you have to speak, when you have to draw, but primarily when you have to write, because writing is something that we all do. We still want to do it. We still want to get good at it. So the article writing course does that for you. It gives you that discipline over 3 months. And I would say that one big benefit is the control that you have, because eventually it's all there. The structure, everything in your brain. And that control is fascinating. Yes, I did get excited about one point, as you noticed. To get onto the article writing waitlist, you have to be either a member of 5000 BC because you get first preference there, or the second thing is that you have to be on the waiting list, and that's second preference. And if you're not in either of these two groups, then you never hear of it, and that's it. So go to psychotactics.com, search for article writing, and get on that list today. And that's it from me at Psychotactics Land. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye.